I'd love to start off talking a little bit about podcasting, potentially cliche, but as opposed to how do you upload or the things that we could find in like a beginner podcasting course, I think you can bring a ton of value in terms of people thinking about getting started, but struggling with some of the mental aspects or the things that we don't see behind the success on social media. And if you could, I would love for you to start by just sharing a story about a time that maybe you felt like giving up on starting, on keeping going when it comes to the podcast.
Yeah, it's funny because when I started the podcast, it was almost like it was supposed to happen and there was zero resistance and it was just flowing, just flew out of me without really much thinking or anything like that. But in everything, and especially things you love, I feel like there's always going to be a dip period. I haven't met anyone who hasn't experienced any dips in their life for their most excited passions and the things that light them up. And for me, if I were to think about the first one that really hit me, it was after I'd recorded 100 episodes. And so to give you some context, what I aimed to do when I started the podcast was I said, I'm going to record 100 episodes. And at the end of 100 episodes, I can decide not to do it anymore. The problem is I recorded 100 episodes. I loved it so much, but people didn't love it themselves. And so it was in that point where I needed to make a decision. Should I stay or should I go? And I really sat with this and I kept doing the work. And as I kept doing it more and more, I realized how much I enjoyed it. And it was really from like episode 125 to episode 225 that was very difficult for me because I felt like I had done it 100 times, but I still wasn't good enough at it to be a professional or for people to recognize what I felt like were my talents and gifts. And it was here and there, and I would get some great feedback from the guests, but it was never like it never felt like the people understood my vision for it as clearly as I understood it myself. Whereas today it feels very much after doing it 422 times that people understand my vision much more and can see it much clearer. Even if not everyone can, that's okay. I feel less crazy today than I did at episode 125. So that period of 100 episodes was very difficult for me because I felt like, oh man, like I'm in my gifts, I'm doing my purpose, but it's not working for the external world. And do I have enough belief to see it through? And even if no one ever sees this or no one ever recognizes what I feel like are my gifts, can I live with that? And the answer was I could. And I kept going.
If you're doing it for the right reasons. And I think there's a natural discoverability that happens when you keep going that a lot of people maybe don't believe in, but I certainly found your show after episode 300 and I would have loved to have found it sooner, but for whatever reason I didn't. So that's just a nice little lesson for people. Now, I know that we can't give like a concrete left-brained answer, but if we could bottle a little bit of something, what reasons do you feel like kept you going, knowing that you shared already that you felt like you could live with it if it didn't succeed? But a lot of people probably feel that way and they still kind of quit to go chase something else. Do you know what it was about podcasting that you felt like you kept going?
It was every time I would try to stop, I felt like I couldn't. Every time I would continue, and after I took a break, it was like it was pulling me in, and there was joy that I was getting from the process. So I remember like recording one episode after not recording for a whole month. And I just felt like, oh, I'm back home. Like this is where I'm supposed to be. And it's like, it's one thing to know your purpose. It's one thing to know something you're passionate about. It's another thing to lose it and then remember it again and find it and it feel amazing when you come back to it. So I imagine it would be similar to like someone who had a wife and they went away on a trip by themselves and then they're like, do I really love her? Do I not? And then you come back home and then it's like, oh wow, yes, of course I do. Like it's so obvious, it's so clear, it's so apparent. And that's kind of how I felt when I was coming back to the podcast after maybe not doing it at all for a single month.
We're on a crazy wavelength right now because I was about to say it's almost like losing a girlfriend and recognizing what you've lost once she's gone. And in that world, though, a lot of times we probably can't get them back. What's cool about podcasting is there's nothing stopping us from getting it back. And that's probably just an unbelievable example. I'm sure you've had that happen to you where you have a thought and then that we're on such a good wavelength that is like, okay, well, I won't ask if it's like having a girlfriend losing them because you just said that. One of the things that is also difficult in those moments is being able to, you could use monetize as like a cliche term, but just see the possibilities of sustainability. Like, how do you afford when it takes 225 episodes? What was your version of struggling with that dilemma?
It was living in my parents' house when I was 25, 26, 27 years old, and I see my friends, and I was in my own world. And so I didn't see anyone, honestly. Like I wasn't looking at other people's lives, but it would be easy for an outside observer to look at my life and look at one of my friends' life and be like, all of his friends are living in the city, or all of his college friends are living in the city, all of it. And so he's kind of isolated. And so I think someone asked me a great question recently. He's like, are you alone? Do you feel lonely? And I said, no, I don't feel lonely. I spend a lot of time alone though. And I think that's the price that I had to pay, which was an enjoyable price for me to pay because I love spending time with people. As you know, you can't do 422 interviews of people without loving people, but I also love spending time with myself. And so I spent a lot of time by myself in that struggle phase of, conversations with my parents. Like, is this really the right idea? I really feel like I have something here. We have to trust the process, but also like, um, you know, I was doing odd jobs here and there. Just like I worked as a photo booth attendant for my friend, and just like little things here and there, just so I could I was living at home with zero rent and zero food, and just like to have some basic expenses other than that. And it's like I was just focusing on the podcast and I'm very grateful for my parents for providing that net of safety that I understand a lot of people don't have. And on top of that, like a great relationship with my parents so that I have their trust and support. And so the way I looked at it was like, okay, if not everyone's going to get this opportunity to be close with their parents and have a great safety net like I do, like why not take a risk in my 20s when I don't have an actual family of my own to support, and that I could chase a dream, like this is a time to chase the dream. And, I'm sitting here 3 years after starting it being like, I'm still chasing the dream and I'm still excited by the possibilities of what's to come. And I'm more in love with the podcast today than I was when I started. And I'm like, what a beautiful relationship that just keeps getting better and better. But those were the early days of just thinking about that vision of where we're going and how it felt, and just living in those moments.
As a former athlete, one of the things that I love about podcasting is that idea that it can continue to grow, even our relationship to the medium, compared to something like making music or being a painter. And as a football player, for me, you start banging your head around. It's like, okay, there's a certain finality here to something that I pumped 40 hours a week into for like 15 years, where I have to deal with regrets around that. There's other silver linings, of course, but there's a lot of reasons why I wish I would have done something that continue to grow for the rest of my life. And podcasting certainly feels that way for me. So I can really relate. I was about to ask about your parents, because obviously supportive is an easy way to summarize it. But did they do what some families will and say, okay, you got 1 year to figure this out. As long as you pay for your groceries, you can stay here as long as you want. Like, what did that look like for you?
It was pretty all encompassing love, in the sense of like, it was like, yeah, you got a year to figure this out, but it wasn't like a pressure situation. And, I'd have conversations with my dad asking me like, when are you going to make real money? When are you going to work this out? And I had, a lot of resistance until recently to those conversations and to those questions. And that caused us to like butt heads, but it all led me to a brighter place. And I'm very grateful for it. And I'm very at peace with all of it as well. And my parents they were great throughout that process.
What were one of the first moments where you were finally like, oh, I am seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, financially speaking, and in terms of sustainability. Because even if you could separate and put aside those butting head moments with your dad, I'm sure you felt pressure whether you noticed it or not. And so I'm also sure that there was a moment where it was like, okay, good, I'm seeing some progress. What was that?
The progress was about a year into it, around that 125 to 225 moment. I was getting offers from people, of job offers from amazing companies that I was excited to work for. And amazing companies meaning like Sean Puri was one who runs My First Million. And to me, that's an amazing company to work with him. And Lucky Trader was another company that was like an upstart NFT company. And so I was getting offers from different places, and those were kind of the validation of, oh wow, like this is actually working. But what was difficult about that was I didn't have enough belief in myself in those moments to be like, no, I'm clear on what I'm doing, and it doesn't involve working for you in this capacity. I'm going to figure out another way to make money that is more in alignment with myself. And I didn't have the understanding of myself or the courage and my conviction to do that. But those were the first signs where it was really working. It was after a year. It was basically like 150 episodes. But the thing is, that felt like, yeah, it was difficult because I was clearly doing it well enough to get job offers, but I didn't know that or could see that in that moment that, oh, if someone else is believing in me, that probably means that I need to be believing in myself more if they're willing to give me this job offer. So I ended up taking that job offer, and that led me to 3 months of fighting back and forth with myself. My dad was happy now, but I was unhappy. so it's like, what's going on there? And I was doing that to appease him versus appease myself. And even after the hundreds of hours of meditation, and even after the understanding of myself from 150 podcast episodes, I still was getting to know myself at a deeper and deeper way. And that's the remarkable thing about life, is you can do amazing work on yourself, and you could also still have more to learn. And there's always more to learn, which is exciting. But I say all that to say, it wasn't as smooth as just like, you do 400 podcast episodes and it all works out. It's like the waves of it, and coming back to it, the waves were an exciting part for me, and a very heartwarming part to me, that I got back to the place I was at when I started, with more information, knowledge, wisdom, and skills.
The idea of infinite games, be it meditation or writing poetry and relationships, in this case, podcasting, I feel is such an underestimated thing that we could teach in schools. Is like, find some infinite game that you love and just keep working at it, whether it's for hobby or business or anywhere in between. And when people are starting podcasting, there are infinite challenges in terms of like logistics or whatever comes to mind. When you are in those first 100 episodes, those back in the day moments, can you remember something that someone who's new to podcasting might struggle with? Or what was one of the struggles that you had when you were first starting out that you think could really help someone?
One of the big struggles I had that I didn't even know was a struggle was that I was uncomfortable on camera. And I started off doing audio only episodes for the first 38. And I wanted to maintain the similarity of the phone calls that I was doing before I started the podcast, of like, who wants to talk on the phone, is what I posted on Twitter. And that led to such amazing conversations that I just wanted to recreate those virtually. So I did that. And then episode 39 comes about. Gary Vaynerchuk agrees to come on the podcast. He has incredible exposure. He's incredible reach, and he's going to do a podcast. It's going to be a video podcast. So I opened myself up to doing video, and I was like, oh, wow, I can do video now. And that, I think what podcasting has really done for me is show me the places where I'm uncomfortable, or shown me it's invited me to be more comfortable in more situations with more people. And so if I look back on that episode with Gary Vaynerchuk, episode 39, I'm like, wow, I was uncomfortable in that moment. Of course I was uncomfortable. It was my first or second time on camera. And so I think it's totally dependent if someone is in their first 100 episodes, but I would suggest to them, where are you uncomfortable in this process? And can you lean into it? Because in that, if you are uncomfortable somewhere, it is likely that that place is holding you back from feeling freedom. So I think that's the biggest overarching thing, more than the equipment or more than anything simple like that. It's really the mind that gets in the way, or the limiting beliefs that someone holds, or where someone's not willing to go, right? If I said, listen, I can't do video because I feel insecure about that, about putting my face out there, well, then I wouldn't be here right now, but I also might not have interviewed Gary Vaynerchuk, because he might have said, you know what, like, if we're not going to do video, it's not worth my time, and I'm okay not to do it, right? He was doing me a favor on episode 39 and a favor that's, still paying dividends for me in some way, right? So I think that it's, if you are in your first 100 episodes of anything, right? It doesn't have to be a podcast. It could be a YouTube channel. It could be like playing a sport. It could be like, ask yourself, where am I uncomfortable in this process? I think that's just such a useful frame for your first 100 of anything.
Speaking of Gary coming on the show, episode 39, what has been your experience with feeling starstruck or nerves, depending who comes on the show? And while you think about it, I'll just mention, for me, there's been a couple moments where I had what other people might consider big guests, and I don't really feel as though I think of human beings in the term of like big gets, like we might see in some legacy media. And actually, Daniel Matte and I talked about that exact topic on an episode. But when Brendan Kane came on the show, because I had just on my own already read 1 million followers and read Hook Point over the course of the last few years, I remember feeling a little more like, oh, a little more nervous, like an athlete might. So you've interviewed a ton of huge guests. To have Gary on episode 39 instead of 439 is pretty special. Did you have any challenges with that aspect of feeling starstruck?
It's interesting how we can delude ourselves in some way, because I don't know if I would have said in the moment that I was starstruck. Maybe I did slightly after. But I definitely was taken aback just at the full circle nature of it all, and the viewing him as the father who was emotionally intelligent, and really, like, that's, to me, is where I struggle with men coming on the show, because that, to me, is what I felt like I lacked as a child. I felt like I lacked the emotional, intelligent, masculine role model. And so in many ways, I've become that, right? By virtue of meditation. And what you feel like you lack is what you actually are here to give. That's your purpose. That's your reason for being. And my dad was an incredible dad, but when I feel starstruck, it is often because I am looking at that person and I'm saying, that's the dad that I wish I got from the emotional intelligence point of view. And being able to recognize that has dropped it. Isn't that funny how that works out? Like you shine awareness on an insecurity, and that insecurity drops. I'm able to say, wow, like my dad is actually pretty emotionally intelligent. And also, like, even if he isn't, like, it doesn't matter. And he was an amazing dad. And these guys are also amazingly emotionally intelligent, but I don't look at them anymore as this is what I wish my dad was. So yeah, I mean, I said episode 378 with Peter Crone was another time where I've been really starstruck. And it was because he's the most emotionally intelligent, wise, from that standpoint, person I feel like I've had on. And so I was like, oh man. And I didn't even know I was doing it. And then looking back on it, then reflecting on it, then being aware of it, it's just like, it's a beautiful thing to expand your knowledge of yourself. And it's only by virtue of putting myself out there and being willing to fail and being willing to to get new understandings of myself that I've come to that realization and that understanding.
That full circle moment of how you've understood your dad, and I'm sure that will continue to evolve too, but that full circle moment is another thing that's really special about your character. I don't think a lot of people think about those types of things. At what point did you start realizing that you had some of those insecurities around your dad's emotional intelligence?
It was in the last month. I have some amazing friends here, and we went through an exercise about, what the positive and negative traits are of your parents, and then what you feel like you lacked. And this was the interesting part for me. I've always said, and I said earlier in this episode, I had amazing parents and they were incredible and they helped me so much and they provided safety net. And it's like, when it's great or when it's good, you feel like there's nothing there. I had amazing parents. So like they didn't leave me with any reason that I felt lack in any way. But it's like, even if you have even if you have two of the most enlightened parents in the world, that's not going to mean that you're going to have zero problems or zero issues. It's going to be like, mom and dad made me meditate too much and didn't take me to the gym. Or mom and dad made me, it'll just like, children will always find problems. That's what children do. And that those problems become the person's reason for being and their purpose in this lifetime. And that's a wonderful thing about the human cycle, and that you can't do it wrong as a parent and you can't do it right either. And like, there's some beauty in that. But really it was from a friend of mine taking me, we had an amazing walk and then we went through an exercise, and it was just a remarkable thing that I hope to gift and give to more people, because it really was very clarifying in a lot of ways.
That would be nice for that to be paid forward, no doubt. What's one of the biggest challenges that you face if we already did, let's say, past podcasting, the first 400 episodes? Like, what do you feel is a big challenge with the show right now?
There are no challenges. I feel zero challenges.
Just rolling downhill.
The level of peace I feel is so remarkable. I don't feel like there will be things I do with the podcast. It will grow, but I don't feel like they're problems. I don't feel like they're challenges. And not just for the podcast. I feel like in life, like no problems. Any problem that I have is something I've created, a story I've told, and I don't feel them. A friend asked me, when was the last time you had a negative thought? Because I basically got the same question, 2 weeks ago. I said, I don't know. I can't remember. It's probably related to clearing the issue with my dad and understanding that was a huge insecurity for me, and then feeling at peace in every moment. Like, I don't have any problems. And when you have no problems, you just want to help other people solve their problems. And I hope by virtue of telling my story in this way, people could say, oh, what's going on with this guy? What happened here? Make them curious or make them interested in like, what he said. He has no problems. Like, is that even possible? Is that a front? My friend said, like, no, it's not a front. I don't have any problems. And specifically, definitely not with the podcast.
So I guess that would remove the possibility to ask about the future as well. And if we had a lot of problems in the past, in the present, we don't have any. Is it safe enough to say that you don't anticipate any from the future then as well?
I'm open to having problems in the future. I'm open to getting triggered in the future. I look forward to those moments. I look forward to understanding where I'm not free. But I know in this present moment, I feel absolutely amazing.
I know one of the things that you're really good at is interviewing. When we think about interviewing, we think of questions. And a lot of times I've seen, Tim Ferriss post about, here's my top 22 questions. I know you've shared some questions, things like that. I don't often ask like one-off questions because I feel as though a lot of times things are just flowing, and you've already given me a ton of different things that I'd love to ask about. However, with this idea of challenges, sometimes using hypotheticals can help. So if we were to use one of those and say, like, if you knew that you had, 6 months, a year to live, would you change the way that you live or do anything differently?
Maybe I'd visit my parents more. I would definitely focus a lot less on women and dating, and especially girls that I didn't know. Um, there, I wouldn't spend as much time. I would spend zero time thinking about girls from a dating perspective, and all of that time that I did would transfer over to my parents.
Well, I am glad that I asked that because, you know, it's nice to, who knows, maybe if it leads to one more 5-minute phone call a week with your parents or something, that wouldn't hurt. I'm sure your parents would appreciate it. Um,
I will say though, I want to clarify. I spend a lot of time with my parents virtually on the phone, but I'm thinking as a 28-year-old man that I would love to be married and look in my head about I would love to have a family someday, right? And so that part of my life of having a family and thinking about that would go away because I have 6 months to live. So I feel, knowing what I know now, I am doing everything in my power to spend as much time with my family as I humanly feel like I can, given what I assume will be the rest of my life. And if I don't, and if I'm wrong in that assumption, that's fine too, right? So, interesting question though, especially for someone who feels like they have no problems.
that's why I asked it. And when I interviewed Sister Helen Prejean, there's a laughing moment of it. I should probably clip this out and share it, but she said, "Justin, are you the Dalai Lama?" And it was a very different topic, but similarly, I was racking my brain trying to think of if I had any um, struggles with relationships. And what her life's work became on death row was all about compassion and being able to help people who have done the most heinous of acts. And I've worked in jails much of my adult life, and I've always been able to see the 95% of people's character for who they are, not the 5% where they did all the, really horrendous crimes. But I've never had to like read in a book how to do that. Going back to childhood, like being picked on or bullied or whatever, I never like was judgmental. I mean, it sucked. I was like, I don't want to hang out with this person, but I never felt um, like a victim, I guess is the best way to say it. And with that, that's what she was laughing at, is like, "Hi, are you the Dalai Lama?" Well, I've had lots of problems and continuously have to deal with intrusive thoughts and things like this. And I've done a lot of work. So when you share that, I'm sure a lot of people will hear it and be like, okay, well, yeah, who's this guy who doesn't have any problems? And I guess in that case, you could laugh and be like, "Are you the Buddha?" All this to say, I get where you're coming from. Was that like nature or nurture? Like, what have you done that maybe somebody could learn from? Because I'm sure they're listening, being like, "Yeah, I don't want no problems either."
Yeah. I would say, where are you upset? What makes you upset? And what makes you say, I don't like reality as it is? Ask yourself that. And be aware in every moment that you're operating in conversations, in just your intrusive thoughts that come in. Why don't I like reality the way it is? Because I'm operating under the base level assumption that human beings are great and our base nature is freedom and pure happiness. And if you look at a child, they are in that state. And I say to myself, okay, why can't I recreate that? Oh, wait, I have recreated that. And so how have I recreated that? I've recreated that by looking at the places where I'm not free and analyzing them. The things that I wouldn't want to say to you 6 months ago or 2 months ago. And I whittled away the list. I wouldn't have mentioned a month ago or 2 months ago that I was insecure about my emotional intelligence for a masculine role. I wouldn't have felt comfortable saying that, even if at a base level it was true. And I think that the more places you can go with yourself about the things you're scared of or the ways you were hurt or all of that, the more free you are and the more at peace you are as well. And so look, if you're listening to this, look in your own life and say, what am I upset? What am I not happy with? What makes me angry? And just ask yourself, why? 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 What's the real reason? Why? Why? Get to the root of it. And you will experience more freedom. And a good tell for this is like, I speak to so many people, and you could see the ease with which someone says something, a story from their past, speaks to how free or not they are with the situation. So like, I was on the phone with this woman, and she was telling me about like a difficult situation from her childhood. And she's like, I've only said this to like 10 people in my life. And, you're the 11th person I'm saying this to. And I haven't told my, previous boyfriends this and whatever. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, this woman has grown to the point where, imagine telling that first person and then telling that second. And now she could tell 10 people this very personal thing. Now imagine when she's on a stage talking about it, right? Like that's another level of freedom she has if she has that capability. She doesn't want to be seen like that. She doesn't want to be seen as that childhood situation for a lot of the time, but she's willing to go there with 10 other people. And then it's like, how do you go there with 10 other people at one time? And it's like, that is freedom. Freedom is the ability to be yourself and own your truth in every moment. And I feel as if I have that ability. So I feel inherently great in every moment and full of my purpose and passion. And that's what makes me feel good, right? It's like I can be myself in every room I go into. I feel like I'm home. And I want that for everyone. I really do. And it's a great question on your part. How do you get there? Well, you look at where you're triggered and you look at the things that you kind of want to say, but kind of don't. And then you understand and try to analyze why exactly that is.
It's one of the best chicken and egg problems, I think, that exist. And a lot of times when people ask me that similar question, because I sure as hell would have never created a podcast, 10 years ago, or list all the other things too. And I think a lot of comparison maybe in my past, like this is not scripted right now. I'm just literally thinking out loud, so I could easily stumble over my thoughts, but going into a dinner party or something where people who are maybe seen as much more successful than I would have led to a lot of comparison. And I don't really compare anymore. I know we've both been to VCon. When you go to VCon, you're seeing a lot of people, like meeting Jesse Itzler in person and these kinds of moments. I don't compare anymore, and I don't know exactly where that came from. Maybe it's doing some work similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's something about like just understanding that's a human being. And Jesse Itzler's seems like an incredible man, incredible father, incredible business person, and just filled with peace and love and ambition and all the attributes that I admire, right? But at the end of the day, that's a human being, right? Peter Crone is just a human being, and he's just being human in that moment. And if you can understand that there's a difference between Peter Crone and you, but it's not a difference worthy of making yourself feel bad about. It's like a good test is like, if you're a guy or girl, can you go up to a guy or girl and show interest in them? It's like, if you can't, that's a place you're not free, right? Similarly, going to the Jesse Itzler, if you've consumed a lot of Jesse Itzler's content and you look up to him as a human being, can you go up to him and shake his hand? And can you treat him like you would treat a friend? That is like a great tell for how free you are in that moment, right? Because you could sit here on the couch being like, "Nah, I'd treat him like no big deal. It's not a problem." But then you go up to him. What actually comes out of your mouth? What actually is going on in your body? And why? And it's okay to be nervous, right? But it's not okay to think that you won't get starstruck, or you think something about how you view the world, and then it's different than reality, and you're just deluding yourself. And obviously, you're not going to get that opportunity in every moment, but you can get the opportunity to, talk to someone randomly at a grocery store. You can get the opportunity today to ask a cashier, like, what is your dream? What are you here to do? right? Like you could just, there's so many little moments you can insert yourself into the flow of life with your natural inclinations. And those help build and help show appreciation for like, what if this person standing across from me will one day, sell out arenas and will go and like will be known as the biggest thing. And can you treat them as a human being, right? Like it's not about the fact that they are known by this amount of people to be this valuable. It's about, this is a human being. So let's treat human beings like human beings, which are pretty remarkable, special in just by virtue of being alive.
And I feel like the new podcaster can learn a lot from that because they are often trying to achieve these sort of gets. And, for me, I felt very comfortable, calm, and everything talking with like Chuck Liddell and Mark Manson and these people that a lot of people, I was watching 25 people go in front of me, all take a selfie and be shaking and leave. Maybe for social proof, I should have taken selfies too, but I didn't. I just sat and shot the shit with Mark Manson about how he marketed that first book for 10 minutes. That's what I wanted to do and what came up in that moment. But what is also cool that I think you're touching on is that person in the grocery store or the cashier that we randomly ask what their dream is. What's so fun about that is that can be just as powerful of a moment for us if we are truly mindful and living in the moment than asking them that versus asking Mark Manson about marketing is like, you can't really compare them. It's like art to me. There's no like better or worse,
Absolutely. I feel the exact same way. And it's just to connect with another human being is a special, special thing. And it's even more special. It could feel even more special when it's someone who's made a big impact on you. But the truth is like, it's remarkable either way, just to be with someone and really see them as they are in this moment.
Fatherhood's been a really big theme that's run throughout this episode already. And I know that we talked about your dad, we talked about Gary Vee, talked about in general terms, fatherhood. And I mentioned earlier too, how much we were on a similar wavelength. One of the things that I was curious about, and as a podcaster, you're always trying to figure out like, well, how do you have this topic without being rude? However, on the flip of that, it's like to make good content that's not like, just vertical videos for buzzwords and stuff like that. You have to be able to talk about certain topics. And I was so curious at your age, at 28, what your thoughts were around the idea of being a full-time entrepreneur who's hustling, because that's a lot of the culture that wants to push you in that direction is like, yo, you need to spend 23 hours working on the podcast versus your interest in building a family and becoming a dad yourself.
Yeah. I view it as like, this is one movie I'm playing or watching, the podcast movie of this is the most important thing to me in this moment. And it will shift when I have a wife, and it will shift when I have children. And just like it was the most important thing ever for me in high school to go to all the parties, it's not that important to me. And actually, I haven't thought about it since in the past 5-10 years about going to a party in high school, right? And it's like, it's essential for us to realize that the story we're acting out today is also going to be a story that we care much less about in the future. And that's hard for us to grasp and wrap our minds around, but I've seen it happen to myself in so many different areas already, in lifting weights, or in college with fraternities, or in high school with parties, or before that with going to Knicks games as a reporter, right? So there's like been so many seasons of my life that I know that each one is finite in some way. Or they can last for a long time, and I can meditate. I've meditated for the past 4 years, and I'll probably meditate for a long time. But regardless, life has different chapters to it, and so I'm very much looking forward to being a father. I don't think it goes against podcasting in any way. If anything, I think podcasting has made me a better father, or I imagine that I will say that someday, and for it to be true. And that's because I get more perspectives on the world, and the more perspectives you get, the more you figure out what is right for you and what resonates, and more knowledge and more information. I view it as like I've gone to over 400 countries now by virtue of talking to all these people. And that is very exciting. And that gives you a lot more of a basis to frame your decisions around. So yeah, I don't think it is contradictory or it's adversarial in any way, podcasting and being a father.
And there's the version of that where someone who's crushing it with a podcast in their 20s could be like, yeah, I don't have time for kids, And so I feel like that's an interesting topic, right? Like, why do you feel like you do want to?
I just always felt called to like have children, to maybe it's the I feel like I want to be the emotionally intelligent father that I never got or felt like I never got. I would say that's probably why in some sense, but I don't remember the first time I felt called to be a father, but I know that it definitely has been on my heart for a long time.
Well, I feel like unless we can't get to know each other well over the interweb, that the reality is probably that you'll make a great father. And I'm sure lots of other people tell you that and whatnot.
Thanks.
But it's just the truth. And I think it was a really valuable thing to touch on for people that struggle with this idea of success versus, the more intrinsic maybe goals that some of us have, like becoming a father, building a family, that kind of thing. You mentioned seasons and chapters, and I feel like another one of the themes have been like the evolution of the podcast and how you've grown as a podcaster. And how has the show changed from first starting out, like everything you do, figure out how to set stuff up yourself and then edit and publish? Like, for the people wondering what the behind the scenes are like right now, do you have a big team? What's the workflow? Because the one thing you do, as well as anybody in the game, is put out a lot of episodes, right? When you share, like, I'm exaggerating, but these 75 people are coming on the episode this month.
Yeah.
How do you maintain that without burning out, let's say? Like, what does it look like for the people that actually want to know the behind the scenes?
Yeah. So I publish episodes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'm pretty solid about, all right, 3 people are coming on a week, or maybe 4, or maybe 2, and figuring that out. For the first 300 episodes, I did everything myself. That's researching, reaching out to guests, doing the episode, doing the video editing, audio editing, all of it. So that was for the first 300. All of it was me. Then after that, someone basically was like, dude, I want to help with the video editing. And a lot of people said that, but one guy in particular, he would send me one clip every day from the podcast. And I was like, "Oh my god." And these are good too. So, wow. Like, I was really impressed, and I ended up hiring this guy. His name is Video King Pablo, and he's been working on the podcast full time for the past, I want to say, 6 months now. I got to find those initial messages, but yeah, I mean, it's a pretty seamless workflow. And what's cool about this, and what the realization I've made from it, is that the more you do, the more you can do, right? Like, the person who is capable of lifting, like the person who has been going to the gym for the past 3 years, is the person who can start running and not lose that much muscle, or still has muscle. So it's like it builds on each other. Or the person who feels more comfortable now going to yoga because they have muscle on them. Like, so like I think about this all the time of like, wow, it's interesting how the podcast in some sense has gotten easier by virtue of me doing it more. It's like, wow, I wish I kind of knew that in the early stages of it. And I didn't realize that the part that I disliked the most, the video editing part, the audio editing, the back end stuff after the episode was over, that part could and would all get outsourced in due time. And so I really just had to tough it out over those first 300 episodes. And the truth is, I probably didn't need to tough it out for that long. I probably could have, if I was thinking that way, done it for 100 episodes and then shuffled it off to someone else in some way. But I waited for the right opportunity, feeling aligned, and I'm so happy that I did, and it worked out perfectly. Obviously, it always does. But the big takeaway I got from it was that like it gets easier the more you do it. The more you do anything, it gets easier. And Video King Pablo is an absolute legend, and I'm excited to hopefully one day make him a millionaire and just fill him with so much peace and happiness himself. But yeah, that's the story of the behind the scenes of the podcast.
That is special because, again, people see the top of the icebergs, right? Or the mountaintop on socials. They can see your YouTube channel. They see the Alex Hormozy interview. They see a lot of these things that we might consider successful metrics, but they're maybe struggling at episode 62 or whatever, being like, I should
Yeah.
get an editor. It's like, oh, okay. No, you just shared that you were able to keep going and creating through 300 episodes, which it can be so hard as sort of experts and people who have gotten to the point that you have to feel like we should share some of the behind the scenes that someone driving in their car, going for a walk or a bike ride would be interested in. And this comes up all the time when I watch documentaries with my wife. She'll say, oh, I went like the F1, for example. We watched the F1 documentary on Netflix, and the questions that she has are always amazing. But the Netflix producers would never think to ask them, like, what did someone eat for lunch today? Or, what is the training regimen for them, or things like very behind the scenes things, or what I think more and more consumers want to hear that we don't really think about as like the experts. And sometimes we even have a hard time breaking them down, So I think that can be definitely really helpful. When it comes to interviewing, that's like one of the big things, or at least one of the big things that you've chosen to share as far as your personal brand goes, because you have the course Art of Interviewing, and it's something that you definitely stand for that's a little more niche than just podcasting. Sticking with that evolution theme, how have you grown as an interviewer from starting the show?
The biggest one is being more comfortable with myself. And we touch on that and the reasons for that. But I would say another way is just by being aware of where the ball is in any conversation in my day-to-day life. Like in this interview, I feel like the ball is focused on me. If this was an actual conversation that we were having in our day-to-day life, it'd be like I'd be the most self-centered person in the world. And you'd be sitting there like, what in the world is wrong with this guy? He's just going off for 2 minutes about himself. And it's like, as much as you try to be authentic to the moment, you have to be aware of this ball and like what the context of this ball is in any given moment. And I think I've just become so aware of how people speak, and also like what they're actually saying when they say certain things and why they say them, just by virtue of me being around and cognizant. And I've been able so much easier to connect with people as well and really understand them and understand their souls. So what's cool is I've done a lot of podcasts, but what I really feel like I've gained is the ability to connect with anybody in any moment to a higher degree than I have in the past, than I ever have considered before. So I'm really grateful for that.
I might be getting my interviews wrong, but I think it was Julian Dory who said you're the type of guy that can be like smacked in the face or like kicked in the nuts and then like still say thank you because you're such a kind, generous, giving person. But if we were to pick a pet peeve or some kind of like common struggle that you see other interviewers do, like what bothers you about other interviewers? And of course, maybe if they're not comfortable, that's one thing, like, but what are some common mistakes that you do see?
Interview starts. So tell me about your story. dude, what are we doing here? Yeah. So I love people, and I have a huge tolerance for anything, right? A lot of different situations. But when I hear that, I'm like, why am I getting angry about that? And I have to go to that place. And the truth is, like, I see the parts of myself where I'm like, it's a wasted opportunity. It feels like wasted potential. And then I have to be like, oh, what? Like, there's nothing, like, that's just what it is in the moment. But if I were really to analyze it, it'd be like, wow, that's a wasted opportunity to create a connection with someone in that moment, to understand a specific part about that person's story. And it's so broad that it does nothing. And sometimes that can lead to gold, and the person could relate something randomly that just happened to them to a random part of their story. But it's not conducive to getting the most out of someone. It's not pointed in any way. And on that topic, it feels like what I'm better able to do today versus a year ago or 2 years ago is in my day-to-day life, I'm better able to ask a poor question and then immediately realize that it was a poor question and instead ask a better question, which leads to more possibilities. So what makes a question better than another? In a lot of cases, it is there's more room for the person to go, but it's directed in a specific point. So like, what's your story? I feel like is a poor question because there's so much room in that moment for the person to go in any place. But you want to give room, but you also want it to be directed. I guess it's an art, man. An art of interviewing, check it out.
It definitely is. And I want to give you permission first off. I know you don't need my permission, but in general, continue to give yourself permission to be critical of others. The reason being, you're such a nice guy, but any great coach, like any great football coach that I had was really hard on me. But they knew how to toe the line and have their thumb on the pulse of that athlete that they were working with. And I think for you, you can help a lot of people, but you're only going to if you're pushing them into that awkward point of feeling a little bit critical. And I used to share a video of PK Subban, defenseman when he was with the Montreal Canadiens hockey team. And it was a quick clip that I really wish I could find. I would love to find it again someday because I used to use it in a leadership talk that I would give about all of John Hattie's work on feedback. And I'd be like, look at this dude come in after every period. He's got half of his gear on. The coaches all rip him to shreds basically in film quickly of what he's doing wrong. And they're like, you got it? And he's like, yep. And he goes right back out there. And during that whole exchange, same as me in film as a football player, I never once had hard feelings about the people giving me that feedback because I understood the relationship.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I give hard feedback all the time and I don't feel bad about it. And you're preaching to the choir. I mean, a few days ago, I'm on the phone with someone I met for the first time and I said, dude, I don't think you're aligned. Is that accurate? Like I'm open to being wrong in that assessment. I just met you, but I feel like some part of you is not in alignment. And he's like, yeah, you're right. Like this, and this. And I'm like, great. Like now we're putting light to a situation. And, my friend David Perel said to me yesterday or 2 days ago, like, I feel like when I'm in an interview with you, it's going to be a difficult interview, but I feel like you're on my side. And that's what a good leader does, right? It's difficult. They hold you to a higher standard, but they're on your team. And I very much feel that. I have no problem giving criticism and I have no problem. I don't like complaining and I don't want my tell me about your story to be complaining in any way because it's not directed towards anyone. And it's not actually all that helpful unless that person is listening right now and can hear themselves in it. But yeah, that's my thoughts on criticism and holding people to a higher standard.
One of the things that I have gotten some positive feedback on with the show over the years is a little portion of our blog post after an episode, which is like bullet point tips. And naturally, it makes sense for yours to come from interviewing. You've already shared a lot of awesome things that can help round that post out. But if there were to be other things, what else would you include in terms of things to keep in mind to be a great interviewer?
I think collecting questions is a very valuable thing that people can do for them. And the funny thing is when you say interviewer, it's like, it seems like it only applies to a very small percentage of the population, but we're constantly interviewing ourselves at all times. Like similar to you're leading yourself at all times by virtue of you being in your own body and mind. So learn how to be a leader because even if you're not in charge of co-opting any group, you're in charge of co-opting yourself to get yourself to the appropriate place. In order to do that, you often have to interview yourself as a leader to ask yourself the right questions to get to the place you want to go to. All that's to say, start collecting questions in your day-to-day life and start when you hear a good question, whether it's listening to a podcast, you've asked a bunch of great questions on this show already. When you're listening to stuff, write them down because these are new ways of looking at the world. New ways, and you can then use them in your day-to-day life, and then you get the opportunity for people to give people new perspectives every day when you just are walking around. Like, I mean, it's so remarkable to me because if you give someone $1 billion, they're still going to be looking for new perspectives on how to use that $1 billion. It will never go out of style. Like it is impossible for it to, because even the person with $1 billion wants to learn more about themselves.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
if they want to learn how to, what are the best uses of that $1 billion. And they also want to learn, who am I really? And like, what does this say about me? And like, so you want to give someone, joy. And if you hear, that's a great question. What you're really doing is you're giving someone a new perspective on themselves or the world that they haven't considered before. And that is like the level of joy that brings you. So all that to say, please, please, please make note of them. They're probably all around you at all times. Just attune your reticular activating system to great questions and watch how you will be able to start noticing and write them down often.
Beautiful use of a definition that I use a lot in the RAS. Like, uh, it's so cool to see that play out for people whenever they're trying to pursue anything, photography, and all of a sudden they start seeing pictures everywhere, and in interviewing. And I know you mentioned that it's so broad to say interviews, and that's definitely true. You said at the very top of the episode that in 400 and some odd episodes, you must like people. But then it got me thinking a little bit about legacy media, late night talk show hosts, CNN, and not that they're not good interviewers per se, or that they love their jobs or love people, but a lot of them do it because it's a job as well, right? So they've probably done, 9,000 interviews, and I don't know how well some of them do like people. So I would argue the opposite. And speaking of that, we talked a little bit about the idea of a big get and a conversation that a lot of people will use that again in legacy media, like who can we get on this episode? From an interviewing perspective, when you look back on the shows you've done, what is an episode that you feel like your art of interviewing was really firing on all cylinders?
I'm hesitant to give specific episodes, but I will say it's episodes where I really connected with the guest and I asked them questions that I couldn't have predicted before starting. Where I was well researched to start, but that my presence took over and we got to new places of understanding of themselves that they previously had never considered. Those are my favorite ones. When we're creating something in that moment, when we're both coming to greater understanding of the human condition and that person's human experience. I love that. That to me fills me with so much joy and makes me feel like, wow, I really did what I was supposed to do in this moment.
Yeah, that's a great feeling. And I can appreciate why you don't say specific episodes. I really try not to talk about specifics either. Do you think that was around like 20 of those or 400 of those?
Oh, it's definitely more recent because it's a deepening of the skill and more and also recency bias plays a role in that. I don't have intimate knowledge of episode 147 or which might have been Cody Sanchez or 216, which might be Bobby Hobart, but it's like I don't really remember those as clearly, and I actually have a very poor long-term memory, and I've noticed that about myself, but I've for the conversation I can call back things. And so it's like a deeper understanding of my own mind is what it's given me too. But I obviously the more you do it, the better you get from your own perspective.
In terms of things that you teach, you're a great teacher. You've got a pretty broad topic in that the show is basically named after yourself. So we talked about interviewing, obviously podcasting. If you were to pick something else to teach, what is it that you think you would also just love to teach?
So I'm really teaching how to be a better human. And I would love to teach on meditation, teach on being comfortable with one's own body and mind. Um, Lifting weights and exercise and nutrition. It's like there's a huge well of running is something I'm learning now, and it's like it's never ending. It's never ending stuff to learn about myself, and also when I learn about it, I want to just share the knowledge with people. So I think interviewing was the first course. I don't know if it'll be the last one, and I don't know the forms that what I'm doing will take, but I'm excited to find out. And I think it really is all centered around flourishing as a human being.
So then there's another really buzzword topic that comes up on socials, especially again, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone really just starting out. They download X for the first time, or they are like, hey, maybe I want to start a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
You're going to see so much different advice about being niche or niche versus having more broad topics. And as a creator, you started out with a pretty broad topic of trying to, help people be better humans. How do you feel about people struggling with that idea of like, should I only create a podcast about running?
I feel like I started with the most specific topic there was, which is myself, right? Like, what am I interested in? There's 0 people in the world who are interested in all of the guests that I've had on at the exact moment I've had them on. And even though it might seem broad, and it is broad in the sense of like anyone could create a show about how to have a deeper understanding of the world, and to me is very specific. And the fact that it was so specific allowed me to do it and has allowed me to do it for a long time because it's so personal in nature. And I think running's an amazing topic. If you have been running for the past few years, or you want a way to have accountability for yourself and start a project, I think it's all amazing. I think a running podcast is great. I think all the sorts of different podcasts you can create are amazing. And I think I did a very specific version of a podcast that most people are probably like, who is Danny Miranda? Why would I ever listen to this? And they're right in this moment for them, and I don't think, I started broad, but I could understand why you could imagine that.
Which is incredible because I shared earlier that we're on the same wavelength. Whenever somebody asks me for life advice for their son or their daughter or a friend of theirs who's going through a difficult time, I'm like, one of the things that I say is that the challenge is that all of these things scale as niche as they can scale, which is like down to the one person's DNA. And I can really appreciate the specificity that creating a show with your own interests, because that is another buzz topic that you'll see people say that the business of you is the most niche thing that you can do. I think this will give people a lot of things to think about when it comes to school versus education, learning. You mentioned there's so many things to learn. Obviously, you're a big learner. There are so many things that I had jotted down that we could talk about. Mindset, being introverted versus extroverted. There's just so many. I could go on and on about things that I came across in my research. But one thing, knowing that we'll naturally have to wrap soon, is the idea of education and school versus learning. How do you think about that massive topic?
The way I view education is it's chosen for you. Traditional education is chosen for you. And so when I think of the word education, I think of traditional education, chosen for you. When I think of learning, I think it's what you choose to do. And I think what we're seeing in our world, our modern day world of 2023, is we are leaning more and more into activities, decisions, hobbies that we ourselves choose. And we are coming from a world, our parents and our parents' parents, was a world where it was chosen for you. It was, if you go a long time ago, you have arranged marriages. If you, in more recent times, it's like, we're choosing the career for you. You're going to be a doctor because we said it. And today, the options are increased. And so the ability to learn, to choose for yourself, is greater than ever. And when I think about learning and education, I think about how can we learn forever, right? How can we continue? How can we be lifelong learners? How can we be constantly open to the flow of information and ideas? And how can we be open to the ways in which we're wrong? Education, traditional education to me, is we're on a schedule, we got a time, the final is this time, and then after the final, you're going to party and we're going to be done and forget all the topics that we learned. learning for me is like, okay, what are you excited about today? What is firing you up? What is this thing that is on your mind and heart? Okay, you're into running. Okay, I'm gonna learn about running, right? There's no test at the end of it either. It's just like you're doing it for the sake of doing it. And it's a much more infinite game, as you mentioned before. So education to me feels like a finite game, and learning feels like an infinite game. And I'm grateful for your question as well, because I'm learning about these things by virtue of your question.
I appreciate that. And I know I just mentioned that there are a ton of other topics like manifestation and how we balance gratitude and goal setting. I think is a cool topic. There's so many things we could get into, and maybe in 100 episodes from now, we can run it back, because these are some pretty cool things. But when you're someone who's created a lot, you've interviewed a lot of people, we could go on forever. I think I made the joke offline about the fact that we could create hundreds and hundreds of episodes. Um, I think this is a perfect moment for me to ask the rapid fire kind of theme questions that tie all the episodes together and drop the mics a little bit. But before I do, on these topics, learning, goal setting, we talked earlier about creator business a little bit, and of course, podcasting and interviewing. Is there anything that you would hate to have to wait 100 more episodes to talk about that we haven't touched on?
No, my mind and heart is feeling good, and I appreciate the thoughtful questions thus far.
Complete, or almost complete, given that we'll do the quick theme ones. Thank you. And one thing that you yourself are learning right now that may be kind of off topic, but just anything that you're learning right now.
Running. I mean, I'm so excited about this. I'm just like, I'm living it. I'm breathing it. I'm learning by virtue of doing, which is a really cool, and is really the right way to learn from my perspective. After spending so much, I could have spent the equivalent amount of time reading about running, rather, reading about running, and I would not have be anywhere close to where I am as a runner today. And so by doing the thing, it has really taught me a lot, and it has fueled my knowledge and want for knowledge and wanting to speak to other people. It's like, I think we also think of learning as it relates to just being in a book, but you learn on the trails with someone, right? You learn by virtue of the community that you put yourself in. You learn by virtue of, okay, I love running. I want to do it with other people. Now let me set up a run club. And it's like, what's that like? 7 a.m. Tuesday mornings. If you're listening to this in Austin, Texas, send me a DM. I'll send you the location. Right? So learning happens in all different ways. And I'm learning about running right now, and I'm absolutely loving that process.
I replied to one of the tweets about the running club being like, yeah, maybe someday I'll be in Texas to join you. Running something that for me, I was a sprinter. So any sort of medium to long distance was out of the question. But last spring, I did get a little more into running, and I think I could hang with a running club at least a little bit. But the cool thing about that is it's for anyone, which is really special. That idea of vulnerability is so powerful. I often think that it's a bit sad that someone can't achieve their own learning goals as fast because they don't know how to learn. And if I could teach something, it would be learning how to learn, because you just said it. Vulnerability is huge. If you want to be a poet, it's like go to your local, stand-up poetry club and just start creating, and you're going to learn so much faster than the person who looks things up. So I'm glad to hear you're doing that with running. One piece of advice that if you were to leave just one piece of advice for the next generation, what would that piece be?
Figure out where you're not free by virtue of the things that make you upset or that you would like to change about what is.
Boom. Mic drops. And if I were to give you the mic, you are one of the best podcasters, one of the greatest interviewing artists in the world. So you have the opportunity to ask me a question. What is something that does come to mind on these topics or otherwise as well?
What's your dream?
When I was just sharing about the fact that a lot of people don't know how to learn, and that if I picked any medium, like, I don't know, painting on shoes is something that I've always found cool. I feel like I could go succeed way faster than a lot of people who have been trying to succeed in that medium for like 10 years. And I try and say that with being somewhat humble and having a lot of humility, but I say it because I think that that's one of the things that holds a lot of people in society back, especially youth, and could end up holding my kids back in 10 years from now, because they don't understand how to achieve their goals that they actually intrinsically love, and they still go get a job or pursue schooling that somebody else is choosing for them. And it's kind of meta and full circle, because you just hit on these topics in that last bit of the conversation that we had. But my dream would be that every youth who want to pursue their goals actually do, and that it's a lot more seamless. It's not going to be easy, which is another part of the point, but that it's seamless for them to know how to go and do that. Because I really strongly believe that youth mental health, a lot at least of the anxiety and depression and struggles we see in addiction and crime, is related to the inability to pursue their passions in a way that's actually sustainable. Having society, especially teens, being able to do that a lot easier than exists right now would be a pretty big dream of mine. And I hope that this show starts helping more and more. And I know that your show already helps a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. Making it more approachable is really an important thing. And I assume by virtue of, following the puck of where it's a lot more approachable today than it was 10 years ago. And in 2013, it was a lot more approachable than it was in 2003. So follow the lines of progress. And it seems like that future that you are hoping for is an inevitability. It is coming soon, and it is absolutely inevitable.
It's getting closer and closer. I just see each year another few people slip through the cracks and not be able to figure it out. And that's just sad on kind of a firsthand basis. But like any big change, there will be people that didn't benefit from it. And that's fine. We'll just keep going, keep working on it. The final thing is where and why people can go to find your work. Like, why do you think people should go find your work, and where do they find it?
I actually think people should not listen to me. I think they should listen to themselves. And so if you get a chance between taking 5 minutes to yourself or listening to my podcast for 5 minutes, I'd prefer people to take the 5 minutes themselves. But if they would like to learn more about me and everything I'm up to, the Danny Miranda Podcast is probably the best way to check everything out that I'm doing and the people I'm talking to. And yeah, hey, Danny Miranda on Twitter and Instagram as well. But I don't need any more followers. I don't need any more podcast downloads. I'll take them, but I don't need them. And I really want more peace for human beings. And if my show can help a little bit, excellent. But really what's going to make the difference is you doing the work inside and interacting with the world to figure out where you're not free. And so thank you for the opportunity, Justin. I really appreciate you. Thoughtful questions, both wearing hoodies. We got the pink and the white in the building. And thank you.
It's a topic for another day too, is colors and clothing, for sure. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It really does mean a lot, because I know how busy our schedules can get in the world of being creators. So thank you so much.
Much love.
Boom. That's awesome, man.
A lot of fun.